Origins of the Cold War by Brandon Bettinger and Danté Khandelwal. Eastern Europe. In 1945, the Big Three of the US, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union agreed to divide Germany into zones and have Germany pay reparations to the Soviet Union. They agreed on free elections for the new governments of freed nations, but the Soviets wanted Eastern European nations to be pro-Russian. This was called the Yalta Compromise. After Franklin Delano Roosevelt died, during the Potsdam Conference, Stalin admitted that he could not allow any anti-Soviet government in any Eastern European country. The U.S. then applies the containment plan to keep the Soviets from expanding communism past Eastern Russia and into Asia and Africa. The Marshall Plan from the U.S. was also not supported by Stalin because of its capitalistic and liberal ideas of helping the economies of new Western European nations.
Germany. U.S., Great Britain, and France withdrew their troops and allowed West Germany to reunite following the end of World War II. The Soviet Union chose to stay in East Germany, which went against the plans of U.S., Great Britain, and France, and ended up blockading Berlin from the rest of West Germany. To counter this, the U.S. and Great Britain used the Berlin airlift for 11 months to fly provisions and supplies to Allied Berlin. In 1949, the U.S. formed NATO to counter Soviet movements and use Western governments as a part of this. Stalin countered this with the Warsaw Pact, which was comprised of Eastern Bloc governments. China and Korea. Chinese communists, led by Mao Zedong, won the war against the nationalists because of the guerrilla warfare. In Korea, Russian-backed North Korea invaded South Korea in 1950. The U.S. came to South Korea's aid after it was almost entirely invaded by the North. The Chinese entered on the side of the North Koreans and created a long fight, which was ended with a fragile truce in 1953. Post-war challenges. Germans were treated poorly in both Soviet and Western zones of Germany. Christian Democrat Party emerged as leaders in Italy and Germany. Charles de Gaulle reestablished the Fourth Republic in France. The U.S. supported Western Europe through the Marshall Plan and NATO, where they gave supplies to Western European countries. West Germany's free market economy and industry flourished. France used nationalized banks to funnel money into key industries and improve their economy. European unity. The common market was created by the coal and steel community and the Treaty of Rome in 1957. France withdrew from NATO and avoided unity among nations because they saw the U.S. as a threat to European and French independence.
Decolonization. Many new countries were made out of colonies in Africa and Asia from all the European countries that would lose territory in the end of World War II. In India, Gandhi used nationalism to create a new constitution and eventually a real Indian country. China expelled their foreigners and united itself under communism. The Philippines, Burma, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia all acquired independence fairly peacefully. Israel became a real state in Palestine, away from the Muslims, who they then kicked out, to become a Jewish state. Egypt got freedom from the British with aid from the United States in their civil war, where they wanted the Suez Canal and all the trade routes in Egypt for themselves. Algeria then got independence from France.
Civil rights. In 1965, Martin Luther King and many other civil rights activists fought for the right to vote, desegregation, and equal treatment for African Americans in America, especially the South.
Soviet Eastern Europe. In 1945, after the war, Stalin purged soldiers and citizens after they returned home, and he also used his forced labor camps to keep them in line. His anti-West ideology kept the country in line, as well as helping them prepare for the long Cold War. Yugoslavia was able to create a multi-ethnic state in spite of all these policies installed by Stalin against anti-Soviet countries being set up in former Soviet territory. In 1953, Stalin died. Khrushchev then took over, and he launched an attack on Stalin and liberalized the Soviet Union. Standards of living vastly improved from Stalinist times. Khrushchev also agreed to peaceful coexistence with capitalism, even though he probably did not want to, seeing as he was a very socialist person. He also allowed Austria to have independence after their 10 years of occupation from Western armies. This, however, was also with Khrushchev disagreeing with Western allies and being very erratic with his demands, as he installed the Berlin Wall in Berlin and also placed nuclear warheads in Cuba to be able to fire at the U.S. from closer. Cold War. Brezhnev and other Soviets led a massive arms buildup against the United States to not suffer humiliation in the face of American nuclear superiority. Each country built up arms but agreed to never launch them by mutually assured destruction, otherwise known as MAD.